Every life has its secrets, but few carry a second chance beyond the grave. On the surface, 32-year-old Ryusei Yokohama presented himself as a simple handyman, though in reality, he operated within the shadows as a true Yakuza. Lived by a strict personal code, collecting debts strictly from fellow underworld criminals and never laying a hand on ordinary citizens. However, everything changed when his boss issued a direct command forcing him to go after a civilian debtor, settle his debt. The debtor offered research results for something called a reincarnation magic circle, boasting it would generate immense wealth, though the hardened enforcer was convinced the claim was almost certainly a lie. Yet, driven by a relentless urge to collect down to the very last yen, he could not rest until he verified the claim for himself, arriving at a shady establishment known as the Magic Circle Club. Intrigued despite his skepticism, the man chanted the strange incantation inside to test whether the magic circle was genuine or scam. Suddenly, his consciousness faded into darkness, marking the end of his former life and the sudden, miraculous beginning of a new existence. His loving new parents gently cradled him in their arms and named him Ryu Landmark. The infant realized the extraordinary truth of his reincarnation. Realizing he had truly been reborn, the infant accepted his new reality with ease, feeling grateful that unlike his lonely past life, his new parents were kind and gentle civilians. Years passed in the peaceful territory known as the Knighthood of Landmark within the Crestoria Kingdom, where young life blossomed amidst nature. Bursting out of the brush with a broad smile, 4-year-old Ryu proudly held up wild herbs, delighted to contribute another side dish to his family's evening meal. He had initially struggled with the stark contrast between his 32 years of past memories and his fragile new body, but as time passed, he gradually learned to adapt. The practical knowledge of traps and hunting he retained from his previous life proved surprisingly useful as he navigated the nearby woods. Examining a strange cluster of fruit hanging from a branch, a floating label named Kohin instantly manifested before his eyes. Ever since he was an infant, the true names of objects had appeared naturally in his vision, enabling him to read effortlessly and identify edible plants like the Kohin fruit and Gokanaji wood. Proud of his successful forage, he ran back to the estate carrying a fresh rabbit, calling out to his family. His elder brother Toro, younger brother Jiro, and little sister Hannah greeted him with bright, welcoming smiles. At the edge of the grounds, his father Farza spoke gently with struggling villagers who were expressing their heartfelt gratitude. Even when a farmer lost his working ox, Farza offered comfort and reassurance rather than demanding tribute. His mother Cecil was equally compassionate, selflessly deferring payments and handing out freshly baked bread to needy townspeople. The entire Landmark family was revered throughout the domain for their extraordinary kindness toward their subjects. Watching his parents give continuous alms and assistance to the poor, he realized that their benevolence bordered on self-neglect, completely ignoring their own financial troubles. As a consequence of their boundless charity, the household lived in surprising austerity, wearing mended hand-me-down clothes and eating modest bowls of thin soup. Quiet reflection was suddenly interrupted when a pair of large hands scooped him up from behind, catching him entirely off guard. His grandfather Kamiza heartily praised the impressive catch, while his grandmother Kay looked on with warm affection. Surrounded by such genuine love, he felt a powerful desire to use his capabilities to support his noble family. By the time he turned 6 years old, the long-awaited day of his baptismal rite finally arrived. Dressed neatly and flanked by his loving parents and siblings, he stood ready to discover what innate magical skills would be revealed to help his family. He stood quietly in prayer as the fundamental purpose of the baptismal rite was explained. Turning 6 meant discovering one's innate talents to guide the future. His eldest brother Toro possessed the knight skill, granting him aptitude across all martial disciplines, while his second brother Iroh possessed cleric, securing their family's future. Because he had already proven himself a prodigy by reading and writing at age 4, the expectations surrounding him were immense. Yet, as he watched the proceedings inside the chapel. His only desire was to acquire a practical skill that could help support his brothers, understanding that existing abilities could always be honed through dedication. Mechanics of skills extended far beyond simple titles, unlocking specialized sub-abilities tailored to each profession. For instance, an axe wielder could develop abilities like super strength or throwing through martial effort, whereas a tailor utilizing the sewing skill could manifest unique traits such as visual measurement and hands become irons. Furthermore, obtaining new skills naturally elevated base attributes depending on the discipline. An axe user gained significant boosts in strength and stamina, whereas a seamstress saw an increase in dexterity, demonstrating how specialized paths fundamentally enhanced physical capabilities. Pondered the divine mechanism behind skill acquisition, knowing that whenever a new power was unlocked, the voice of the world resonated directly within one's mind. He couldn't help but feel a bit nervous about hearing a divine voice echo inside his head for the very first time. Family offered gentle words of encouragement as his turn arrived, assuring him there was nothing to fear and that the ritual would be over in a moment. With a resolute nod, he walked down the grand aisle of the cathedral toward the altar. Approaching the priest, he was instructed to place his hands upon a glowing crystal sphere while offering a quiet prayer to the divine. Following the directions carefully, he pressed his small hands against the cool glass surface. The orb burst into a radiant light, pulsing with immense magical energy as the priest urged him to hold on tight. His parents watched breathlessly from behind, eager to witness the reveal of their young son's divine talents. As the glow subsided, the priest carefully examined the readings and muttered in grave disappointment, revealing that he had unlocked Gakudo alongside Jack of all trades. Seeing the cleric's troubled expression, the boy cautiously asked if Jack of all trades was a bad result, while the priest noted that his separate appraisal skill might at least offer some utility. The priest explained the severe drawback of his main talent. While Jack of all trades was a unique skill allowing him to use almost every other skill in existence, no amount of hard work or training would ever allow him to master any of them. Potential seemed bound by an absolute ceiling, as skills normally rated from S+ down to G- were capped permanently at G+ due to the Jack of all trades trait. Seeing the tension, the priest offered gentle reassurance, highlighting useful abilities like small magic storage and reminding them that his appraisal skill possessed great room for growth through effort. While pondering the unfamiliar term Gakudo that mirrored his past life connections, he listened as the priest admitted to never seeing such a skill in 40 years, recommending a full character appraisal before he politely took his leave. As he stepped out from the inner sanctum, his anxious parents rushed forward and pulled him into a tight, relieved embrace, apologizing for how long the ritual had taken. Watching the joyful townspeople gather outside the grand doors, his father beamed with pride, celebrating this milestone day that marked the official start of his young son's journey. Yet, inside the carriage ride home, he rested his head near the window, quietly burdened by the fear that everyone would be crestfallen if they learned even the priest was disappointed by his abilities. Upon returning to the estate, he was greeted by a warm, grand celebration filled with cheering family and staff eagerly welcoming the guest of honor. His mother gently placed a woven crown of fresh flowers atop his head, leaving him momentarily wide-eyed and stunned by the affectionate gesture. Overcome with emotion by their unconditional love, he looked up at the smiling faces around him and offered a heartfelt word of thanks. Surrounded by warmth and laughter, he realized that in all 32 years of his previous life, he had never experienced a celebration like this, though a quiet uncertainty still lingered in his mind. He sat quietly, burdened by the fear that his family would be disappointed to learn of his Jack of all trades skill. Noticing his hesitation, his father gently questioned if he truly believed they would hold such disappointment in their hearts. With a warm chuckle, his father reminded him that he was exceptional regardless, already literate at such a young age, while also possessing valuable talents like appraisal and Gakudo. His father added that Jack of all trades should naturally grant him access to magic storage, a revelation that brought back memories of what the priest had mentioned earlier. Setting a piece of fruit down on the table, his father asked if he was truly unaware of this capability. Taking the Rigo fruit into his hands as instructed, he spoke the command to store it, gasping in astonishment as it vanished into thin air. Seeing his wonder, his father explained that the fruit was now held within a personal pocket dimension where time stood still, keeping perishable items perfectly preserved. Father went on to note that unlike the static cap of Jack of all trades, his appraisal skill possessed room to grow and unlock even greater utility in the future. Shifting the topic to another unknown, his father mused that he had never encountered a skill called Gakudo, turning to Sebastian to ask if he had any insight into it. Pondering deeply, the elderly butler admitted it was entirely foreign to him as well, surmising it might be what the world considers a unique skill that lay beyond even the priest's knowledge. Determined to seek answers from an expert, his father ordered Sebastian to arrange a meeting with Satan Sensei, to which the butler bowed in prompt agreement. He announces to his son that starting tomorrow, training will begin in earnest alongside Toro and Jiro. While his mother oversees his academic studies, his father and Sugo, the captain of the domain's guards, will instruct him in martial arts. Ryu eagerly accepts, secretly resolved to push his versatile ability to its absolute limit despite its status as a jack of all-trade skill, while his young peers cheer him on and share excitement. Reflecting on how he used to only watch the other children train from afar, the young boy is thrilled that he can finally join them. To mark the occasion, the family presents him with a training sword wrapped in a bow, inspiring him to vow that he will work as hard as possible to prove useful to his family. Ryza announced that Ryu would be joining the classroom lessons alongside Toro and Jiro. Since he could already read and write, she decided to start his instruction with Basic Addition while the others worked on their assignments. He began demonstrating simple counting using Rigo fruits as visual aids, adding them one by one to show how basic numbers work. However, as she presented increasingly complex arithmetic, word problems, and division, the young boy calculated every answer instantaneously in his head. With absolute confidence, he called out the final answer of 2,640, leaving his tutor completely flabbergasted by his uncanny mastery of multiplication and division. As Fariza showered him with praise, declaring him an absolute genius, the boy merely smirked internally, knowing that tracking numbers was second nature from his past life as a moneylender. Wondering what to teach next, she brightened up and suggested shifting their focus to history, taking the young boy entirely by surprise. Quickly realized that whatever historical knowledge he possessed from his former world was completely useless here, requiring him to learn this realm's past entirely from scratch. As he clutched his aching head over the daunting task of memorizing unfamiliar names and dates, his tutor smiled with relief, glad to finally find a subject where she could properly instruct him. He diligently applied himself to studying the records of the Crestoria kingdom, learning that the landmark family held land as vassals under Margrave Sra and were obligated to answer their lord's call in times of crisis. Historical texts detailed how his grandfather, Kamiza, had risen from a common soldier during the last Great War to earn noble status through his military achievements, paving the way for his father, Farza, to lead the family as its second-generation head. He reflected on the rest of his family, noting that his grandparents were still remarkably energetic in their early 90s, living a peaceful life in a detached manner while frequently helping out around the estate. Their early retirement, as it turned out, stemmed from a mutual disdain for attending high-society noble gatherings, effectively dumping all political duties directly onto his father's shoulders. Calm reflection was suddenly interrupted by the sharp, repetitive clack of wooden weapons striking one another nearby. On the training grounds, the young boy found himself breathing heavily as he struggled to hold his ground during martial practice, swinging his wooden sword with all his strength against a much more seasoned opponent. The instructor called out, warning him that he was losing his nerve and urging him to step forward into his strike, prompting the boy to let out a fierce battle cry and lunge inward. Despite his enthusiastic charge, a swift counter technique easily parried his blade and sent him tumbling onto his back. Rubbing his sore head in defeat, he acknowledged that he was still no match for his older brothers, though one of them kindly stepped over to check if he was all right. Their father offered encouraging words, commending the older brother's defensive awareness while reassuring the young novice that he had done exceptionally well for his first session, before calling up the next pair for sparring. While he enjoyed physical activity and found combat training exciting, the boy recognized a stark difference between hunting wild beasts in the forest and engaging a trained human opponent in martial combat. Tightening his grip around the hilt of his wooden sword, he pondered whether this vast disparity in combat skills stemmed from the specialized job classes like knight or warrior compared to his own jack of all trades assignment. Slapping his own cheeks to shake off any lingering negativity, he resolved to find a way to make himself useful to the household. Though he assumed it would take time to discover his purpose, an opportunity presented itself surprisingly fast. He soon uncovered the dire reality of the landmark family's financial situation. As he dove deeper into the ledgers, he was appalled by the complete lack of organization, realizing that such messy accounting could only lead to utter disaster. Inspecting the informal records of money lent to the locals, he discovered there were no proper ledgers, and debt collection relied entirely on memory. Slumping onto the desk in despair, he came to the grim realization that this haphazard record-keeping was a tradition passed down all the way from his grandfather. Clutching his head in desperation, he cried out that the household was heading straight for bankruptcy at this rate. Just then, a cup of tea was quietly served beside him, accompanied by a voice agreeing with his bleak assessment. Surprised by the unexpected arrival, he turned to see the family butler, who admitted that he had been trying to warn the master about the household finances for quite some time. Overjoyed at finding an ally, the boy instantly grasped the elderly servant's hands, eagerly proposing that they work together to overhaul the family's entire accounting system. A bright smile crossed his face as he realized he had finally found a domain where his unique talents could be truly useful. Working diligently alongside Sebastian, the young boy focused on reviewing the landmark family's financial documents, preparing detailed materials to convince his father. Interrupting their study session, the elderly butler suggested they conclude for the day, announcing that a guest had arrived at the estate. Greeting the instructor in the hallway, Farron expressed his gratitude to Satan Sensei, praising her exceptional ability to perform character appraisals. Gathered in the sitting room, Farron asked the teacher to evaluate his son's skills, recounting how the young boy received an unprecedented skill during his recent baptismal rite that left everyone bewildered. Kneeling down to face the boy directly, Saitin politely requested permission to proceed with inspecting his traits. Reaching out her hand, she explained the proper etiquette involved in performing an appraisal, noting that even with her lifelong active skill, she could not use character appraisal on herself. Gently placing her hand over his head, a soft glow illuminated her focus as she attempted to analyze his mysterious Gakudo trait, remarking that no such skill had ever been recorded in the royal capital. As her magic washed over him, he squirmed slightly from the strange sensation. Feeling shocked by what her inspection revealed, she announced that her high-grade appraisal could barely analyze the skill at all, declaring it to be equivalent to an S-rank power. Explaining her findings to Farron, she clarified that the skill represented an abstract concept of mastering a path, suggesting it might act as a unique catalyst that directly enhances all other abilities. She concluded that since this was likely the first recorded instance of such a skill in the kingdom, they would simply have to monitor its progress over time. Turning to the young boy, Farron warmly encouraged him to keep working hard, reassuring him that understanding would come naturally. Expressing his agreement, the boy resolved to continue his efforts. Despite his past life as a seasoned YAKUZA, he could not fathom the true extent of power his Gakudo skill possessed, though its description implied a path toward ultimate mastery. As he pondered whether continuing his current efforts would yield answers, the instructor inquired when he had first awakened his appraisal ability. Surprised by the sudden question, the boy listened intently as she informed him that his appraisal skill was likely close to leveling up and meeting its next usage requirements. Turning to the proud father, she praised the child as truly extraordinary. She explained that most people are taught the skill around age 6 and spend years fulfilling the necessary conditions to level it up, making his rapid growth exceptionally rare. Father flushed with pride and modest embarrassment, begging her not to exaggerate, but she continued to marvel at the boy's intellect. She noted how remarkable it was that he had taught himself to read and write by age 4, absorbing knowledge effortlessly after his baptismal rite without any outside guidance. Confidently standing by her assessment, the teacher guaranteed his genius, prompting the family to discuss sending him to an academy regardless of his official skills, as his potential extended far beyond ordinary limits. A few days later, having finished compiling her official report regarding the boy's unique abilities, the instructor politely declined an invitation to stay for a meal and took her leave from the estate. Shortly after her departure, the young boy checked his status and discovered that his appraisal skill had indeed evolved. It now displayed detailed descriptions and functions beyond mere names, such as certifying loan documents. Realizing he could now comprehend the properties of objects directly without needing reference books, he bolted past his surprised family, announcing his immediate departure for the nearby forest to test his newly enhanced vision. Deep in the woods, he marveled at the convenience of his upgraded ability. By focusing on plants, he could instantly analyze their medicinal or poisonous traits, effectively mastering identification and expanding his knowledge in a single swift motion. He stood humming thoughtfully in front of a massive, overflowing mound of freshly harvested forest fruits and plants, quickly realizing that he had gotten entirely carried away during his foraging spree. Staring at the massive heap, he wondered how he could possibly transport it all, as it clearly exceeded the capacity of his magic storage. Ultimately, he had to make 10 full trips back and forth, once again making a major contribution to the landmark family's food supply. A heavy hand slammed down onto the wooden table with a startling thud, causing the frightened debtor to squeak in terror as he cowered in his seat. Sugo roared in anger, leaning in close with a fierce glare as he reminded the man that paying back what was borrowed was an absolute rule. Extending a small hand on Sugo's arm, the young boy calmly intervened, telling him to stop since he was terrifying their guest. Reining in his temper, Sugo offered a quick apology for his short fuse, while Ryu folded his hands together with a sweet, serene expression. With an innocent smile that belied his cunning intent, Ryu brightly asked if they could now discuss the terms of repayment. A few days prior, the young lord had bowed deeply before his father and butler, presenting a detailed financial plan and begging to take charge of the family's debts. His father had hesitated, feeling it would be awkward to demand repayment during such difficult times for the villagers. However, Sebastian firmly sided with Ryu, pointing out that enforcing order was a lord's duty and highlighting the pressing need for upcoming academy tuition fees. Reluctantly entrusting the finances to his son, Farron watched Ryu flash a confident thumbs up as the boy quietly plotted his next move. Seeking muscle for his operations, Ryu had tracked down Sugo as he napped after training, startling the warrior with a sudden request for aid. He made his way into the quiet town alongside his companion, seeking out the location where their target was known to linger. Stopping outside a rustic tavern, the pair confirmed that this was indeed the establishment their target frequented. His companion voiced doubt about allowing a child inside such a rough venue, offering to handle the matter alone, but the young lord firmly reminded him to stick to the agreed plan. Stepping through the door together, they scanned the dimly lit interior, taking in the few patrons scattered across the room. Directing the boy's attention toward a solitary table, the guard pointed out the man sitting alone with a drink. Approaching the patron directly, the young noble offered a polite greeting, identifying him by name while the man looked up in gruff surprise. Unrolling an official ledger before the startled debtor, he brightly announced that he had arrived to collect an outstanding payment. Revealing his identity as the son of Lord Farza, he explained that the debt was owed directly to his father, leaving the tavern patron paralyzed with shock. Sensing the overwhelming physical pressure emanating from the massive guard looming silently behind the smiling child, the debtor began to break into a cold sweat. Holding up the signed IOU document, the boy calmly dismissed the man's nervous feigning of ignorance, reaffirming the exact details of the loan. He systematically pointed out that despite years of bountiful harvests, not a single copper coin of interest had been returned, leaving the debtor stammering for an excuse. Before the man could formulate a proper response, a heavy fist slammed onto the wooden table with shattering force, sending terror straight through the debtor. Looming large over the small table, Sugo roared that borrowing money came with the absolute obligation to pay it back. Stepping in to calm his quick-tempered companion, the young lord offered an apology for the intimidating display, instantly shifting the dynamic back to a polite negotiation. Terrified into submission, the debtor frantically promised full repayment, but the boy calmly redirected the conversation towards structuring a practical agreement. Proposed a manageable payment plan, recognizing that draining the family's entire livelihood at once would benefit neither party. Relief washed over the debtor as he realized he could settle his debt in small, manageable monthly installments. Sitting together at the table, the man quietly reflected on how surprisingly fair and reasonable the young noble was, despite the terrifying guard standing behind him. The terms clearly outlined on paper, the debtor readily gave his final agreement to the payment schedule. Having successfully secured the first agreement, the energetic young master and his companion departed to handle the next target, marking a decisive first step toward financial recovery. Through diligent effort, the funds previously loaned out by the Landmark family began to flow back into their coffers, providing a much-needed boost to their financial standing. Keeping meticulous ledgers to eliminate wasteful spending, the family stabilized their estate. Confident in the progress, his father entrusted more responsibilities to him and Sebastian, fueling his determination to ride this momentum even higher. The Grand Landmark Estate, a newly brewed dark beverage, steamed gently in a delicate teacup. Visiting merchant took a hesitant sip of the mysterious dark liquid, only for his expression to soften into absolute bliss as the rich flavor washed over his palate. Lighted by the guest's positive reaction, the lord of the house noted his satisfaction, while the merchant praised the beverage's rich aroma, refined bitterness, and surprisingly clean finish. The merchant offered to help register the process with the guild without prying into secret ingredients. The young boy quietly recognized the drink as the coffee from his former life, crafted by roasting and brewing coheen seeds. Recognizing that coheen plants grew wild throughout the domain's forests, he had arranged for indebted farmers to cultivate them, planning to target wealthy nobles as their primary clientele for this new venture. Father grasped the strategy instantly, realizing that high society's eagerness for novelty would make them willing patrons once free samples were introduced at elite tea gatherings. With an ambitious smile, the boy outlined the goal to secure initial capital from nobility before expanding production, a business logic the merchant wholeheartedly endorsed. As both the young master and the merchant shared a conspiratorial chuckle over their lucrative strategy, his father could only look on with amusement at the pair of crafty schemers. He pointed out to his father that the new merchant appeared surprisingly honest, but Farron quickly cautioned him against being overly trusting. The young boy jumped back in surprise as his father firmly reminded him that naive trust could easily lead to trouble. Farron admitted that past merchants had taken advantage of the family's good nature by inflating invoices. However, after reporting those corrupt traders to the guild with evidence, they were introduced to this trustworthy replacement. Acknowledging the lesson, his father rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly, agreeing that they would have to build trust carefully from this point forward. Looking out across the sprawling fields of the Landmark territory, Ryu realized that a successful coffee venture could stabilize their realm's finances while allowing indebted farmers to prosper. Enthused by the prospect of a win-win scenario where debts could finally be collected, he resolved to seek out even more side businesses. Thoughts turned to food stalls, specifically flour-based dishes. While options like takoyaki were out due to a lack of seafood nearby, high-margin foods like udon, pasta, or okonomiyaki offered incredible potential. Moments later in the kitchen, he presented a fresh plate of raw noodles to the head chef, who stood bewildered after learning the dough had been kneaded using clean feet. After taking a test bite of the cooked noodles and savoring the familiar taste, Ryu watched expectantly as the chef nervously sampled the dish, only to be struck dumb by its incredible texture. Chef loudly exclaimed that he had never experienced such perfect firmness and chewiness in noodles before, much to Ryu's quiet delight. Confident in the noodles' base quality, he entrusted the soup broth creation to the chef while laying out fresh ingredients to pair alongside it. He offered a bright wink of encouragement to the head chef, declaring that this was the perfect opportunity to showcase his true culinary skills. Fired up by the boy's challenge, the head chef's eyes burned with sudden determination as he accepted the ultimate culinary test. Together in the kitchen, they experimented with various ingredients, carefully simmering, stirring, and tasting until the broth achieved rich perfection. With great pride, they announced the completion of their masterwork, a steaming bowl of handmade udon noodles served in a fragrant chicken broth. Eager to test their creation, they immediately brought the piping hot dishes into the dining hall for the family and staff to sample. Household members enthusiastically tasted the noodles, showering praise on the unique chewy texture and marveling at the young boy's incredible culinary genius. While everyone loved the flavor, they pointed out that eating the long, thick noodles with forks was rather tricky, leading the boy to reveal a clever backup plan. Lifting a silver dome, he unveiled a secondary dish of short pasta coated in a rich tomato-based fruit sauce, instantly delighting everyone with its mouth-watering aroma. Diners eagerly took bites of the news dish, using their forks to easily sample the sauce-covered pasta. Pasta adaptation proved to be an instant triumph, earning unanimous acclaim from the family for its delicious sauce and effortless compatibility with Western utensils. Sat in quiet silence as lively chatter filled the room, realizing with dramatic despair that his prized udon bowl now sat completely abandoned and forgotten by everyone. Collapsing onto his knees in comical defeat, he lamented how his top-recommended dish had been overshadowed by the pasta, only to feel a comforting hand suddenly pat his shoulder. Turning around, he was met with warm encouragement as Toro brightly declared his affection for the udon dish, echoed enthusiastically by the head chef, bringing tears of overwhelming joy to the young boy's eyes. Invigorated by their heartfelt support, his determination burned anew outside the family estate as he swore never to give up on udon. Right as thoughts turned toward his little sister. Stepping into the bustling local eatery, Ryu greeted the cheerful shopkeeper who welcomed him warmly, recognizing him as the young master from the Lord's household. She wondered what brought him by. The chef jokingly quipped that Ryu's reputation for collecting debts from deadbeats was becoming quite famous. The Ryu quickly noted he certainly owed them nothing. She chuckled warmly at the exchange, while Ryu deadpanned, remarking that since they had never borrowed anything, there was nothing to pay back anyway. Turning to the matter at hand, he politely explained that he had actually come to ask her for a favor. Presented a freshly prepared bowl of noodles, asking if she would be willing to serve it at her establishment. Upon taking a bite, her eyes widened in delight at its delicious flavor as he outlined his vision for spreading the dish across the entire territory. Shopkeeper enthusiastically agreed to feature the dish, prompting a joyful and relieved thank you from the young boy. He laid out his simple plan. He would build a local noodle factory to produce the broth and noodles, delivering them freshly boiled each morning so the restaurant would only need to assemble and serve them. A quiet whisper, she questioned if such high-quality noodles could really be sold cheaply when they seemed fit for nobility, but he reassured her that affordability was the entire goal. He firmly shook hands to seal the agreement, ensuring the food remained accessible to commoners. Armed with this first partnership, he pitched the idea to other nearby establishments, who eagerly signed contracts once they saw the popular eatery leading the way. Having secured his father's permission, he oversaw the construction of a modest noodle workshop, determined to turn his new venture into a thriving success. He stood before the newly assembled workforce, addressing them warmly as they gathered to hear the operating procedures from the head chef. Noticing the skepticism whispering through the crowd about being managed by a 6-year-old child, he cleared his throat, preparing to put their doubts to rest. With absolute conviction, he declared that the formidable backing of the landmark family guaranteed their complete security and success, leaving the workers utterly stunned. Realizing his choice of words sounded suspiciously like a YAKUZA syndicate, he quickly caught himself and rephrased his declaration in a more wholesome light, easing the workers' anxieties. Soon as production commenced, order requests flooded in relentlessly from partner restaurants, demanding dozens of noodle portions daily. Watching loaded horse-drawn wagons set off to make deliveries, he felt immense satisfaction seeing the factory operate so smoothly from day one. Stepping inside to encourage the staff, he was instantly enveloped in a thick, choking cloud of airborne flour dust. Observing the workers diligently mixing giant bowls of flour amid the haze, a grave safety concern suddenly struck him. Hurrying inside, he raised his voice in urgent warning, commanding everyone to eliminate all open flames to prevent a catastrophic dust explosion. His abrupt warning brought all work to a sudden halt, leaving the workers frozen in confusion over his strange directive. Patiently explained the hidden dangers of airborne flour to the startled workers, clarifying that while flour itself is safe to eat, fine dust suspended in the air can instantly ignite and explode when exposed to open flame. To ensure total safety, he stressed that any tasks requiring fire must be conducted outside the building. Drive the point home, The young boy cheerfully demonstrated how an explosion would vaporize the entire shed without a trace, leaving the staff utterly horrified. Seeing the head craftsman strictly command everyone to follow the fire rules finally put his mind at ease. With proper safety protocols in place, the proprietress immediately began introducing fresh pasta onto the main menu, drawing eager patrons who devoured every plate. Up until now, the staple food across the territory was dark, rock-hard bread that required soaking in soup just to chew, often relegated to mere travel rations. Soft, flavorful pasta quickly gained popularity as a revolutionary alternative destined to supplant the tough old loaves. Watching the dining area from the doorway, he observed with satisfaction as customers thoroughly enjoyed their meals. He approached the counter. The proprietress greeted him with a warm, welcoming smile. Noticing his unusually serious expression, she grew tense and asked if something serious had occurred. Breaking into an enthusiastic smile, the young boy unveiled a steaming, freshly baked dish and offered to introduce a brand new menu item. He introduced his creation as a modified okonomiyaki, a savory baked batter topped with tomato sauce, gooey cheese, and rich ingredients, designed to utilize their current supplies while offering a delicious new flavor. He excitedly presented his newest culinary creation, authentic udon noodles, served with custom wooden chopsticks. When the proprietress expressed concern over production costs, he reassured her with a clever promotional strategy, offering a buy-one-get-one special that included a complimentary bowl and chopstick set. Despite the enthusiasm, early sales figures revealed that udon was struggling to compete with the overwhelming popularity of pasta and mock okonomiyaki. He grit his teeth, determined to find a way to make the new noodle dish take off. Spark interest. He sat in the dining hall and skillfully demonstrated how to eat the long noodles using chopsticks. Watching him handle the utensils with ease, curious patrons began asking about the wooden sticks and gathered around to learn the technique. The proprietress effortlessly picked up food with her own pair, marveling at how convenient it was to eat single-handed. Impressed by her dexterity, a nearby diner asked for a lesson, prompting her to direct his attention straight to the young inventor. Patiently guiding the customer step by step on how to hold the chopsticks, he watched as the diner successfully picked up his food. Around the room, happy patrons embraced the novel eating style, agreeing that flour-based dishes were rapidly taking over the city. Back at the estate, the new noodle dishes had already become a proud specialty of the landmark family. Though it had taken time for highborn nobles to grow accustomed to holding bowls and maneuvering chopsticks, they had gradually embraced the habit. After seeing their younger sibling practice so earnestly, his brothers had thrown themselves into mastering the utensils as well. Before long, even his parents and little sister were practicing around the dinner table, while his father quietly pointed out that bringing one's mouth directly to a bowl was traditionally poor manners. His mother warmly defended the practice, noting that convenience and comfort inside their own home were what truly mattered. His mother smiled fondly, marveling at how full of brilliant ideas children could be. Hearing her praise, he secretly reflected on how his culinary innovations were actually derived from thousands of years of cultural history from his previous life. Looking around the table at his warm and cheerful family enjoying their meal together, he felt a profound sense of gratitude and affection for the wonderful household he had been born into. He set his hand firmly upon the desk beside his ink bottle and quill, ready to begin his next scheme. A sly, cunning grin spread across his face as he anticipated the massive profits ahead. Clasping his hands together with a greedy chuckle, he eagerly looked forward to collecting what he instinctively thought of as protection money, before quickly correcting himself to call it tax revenue. Taking advantage of a break from sword practice, Ryu made his way into the woods to inspect his traps, knowing that hunting remained vital for putting food on the table while their family finances gradually recovered. As he navigated through the brush, a sudden rustle in the undergrowth caught him entirely off guard. To his surprise, a massive wild boar had fallen into one of the pit traps, promising a grand feast if he could retrieve it. He quickly moved into position, securing a thick rope around the heavy catch to begin hauling it out. Strain was immense, the sheer weight of the beast threatening to overpower him. Realizing he needed extra strength, he focused his energy and activated his physical enhancement skill to give his young body the necessary boost. The physical enhancement taking effect, he marveled at the practical utility of his jack-of-all-trades skill set, even at its basic starting level. Gritting his teeth against the exertion, he hauled on the rope with everything he had, slowly hoisting the heavy carcass upward inch by inch. Finally, with one last desperate pull, the dead boar was successfully dragged clear of the pit. Collapsing against a nearby tree trunk, he let out a tired sigh of relief, realizing he couldn't have managed the task without his physical enhancement skill. Suddenly, an ethereal voice echoed in his mind announcing that his hunter skill had reached its limit, causing him to startle and look around in alarm. Looking around the empty forest, he realized the voice was resonating directly inside his head, proclaiming that he had met the activation condition for a special ability, an unlocked limit break, raising his hunter rank further. Status bonuses were applied to his agility and dexterity. He struggled to comprehend how his jack-of-all-trades talent, supposed to cap out at lower ranks, had somehow surpassed its natural boundaries. He stood beneath the towering canopy, staring up as the realization washed over him. By pairing his jack-of-all-trades skill with limit break, nothing could stop him from becoming the strongest. Realizing his versatile skill was actually a strength rather than a weakness, he resolved to work tirelessly so he could contribute even more to the landmark family, though first he needed to drain the hunted boar. Later, inside the estate classroom, his fellow young students looked on quietly as he threw himself into his studies. One of his classmates marveled at his rapid growth, admitting that while he used to teach him, it now felt as though he was about to be surpassed entirely. Their instructor offered high praise for his efforts, encouraging the other boys to work just as hard so they wouldn't be left behind. Just then, the voice of the world announced that his teacher skill had hit its limit, triggering limit break to raise it to F rank and boosting his intelligence. Overjoyed by the sudden notification, he threw his hands in the air with a victorious cheer, leaving his confused companions staring at him while he sheepishly laughed it off. The period that followed, one skill after another, swordplay, spearmanship, merchant craft, and cooking, reached its upper limit and shattered through to new heights. And, as he lay exhausted on the grass, gazing up at the sky, the mysterious voice of the world suddenly went silent. Though he felt a quiet loneliness at the sudden silence, he sat up with renewed determination, knowing that around his 7th birthday, a brand new companion would be joining the landmark household. He stood quietly as his father introduced Shima, the 10-year-old grandson of Sebastian, who was beginning his service as a servant today. Shima exchanged polite handshakes with the other boys, while Farron noted that he would be joining them for sword practice as well. Moments later out on the training grounds, wooden practice blades clattering against one another echoed through the air until the instructor called time. Raising his hand, the instructor offered the floor to anyone bold enough to challenge Toro next. Without hesitation, Shima stepped forward, eagerly offering to take on Toro despite knowing his opponent possessed the prestigious knight skill. Duel commenced with fierce intensity, as Shima charged forward swinging his sword with high energy, though Toro blocked every strike effortlessly. The swift, decisive counterstrike, Toro disarmed the new servant, sending Shima's wooden sword clattering across the grass. As the instructor declared the match over and gave Toro the victory, Shima urgently called out to halt the decision. Refusing to give up, Shima insisted he could still fight and requested another round, prompting the instructor to smile at his determination and call for the next bouts. With renewed vigor, the young trainees crossed their wooden swords once more, throwing themselves back into the martial drill. He marveled inwardly as Shima maintained his relentless pace despite this being his 2nd consecutive bout. It seemed as though the boy possessed a hidden stamina boost or a specialized martial skill, showing no signs of slowing down. The sudden, powerful sweep of his wooden sword, Toro knocked Shima off balance, sending him tumbling onto the grass. Calling an end to the match, Toro stood victorious while Shima sat defeated, nodding in reluctant agreement that he was simply no match for his older training partners. Acknowledging Shima's refusal to surrender, the adult instructor offered words of encouragement before assigning Ryu as his next opponent, catching the young boy completely off guard. Readying his wooden blade, Ryu eagerly announced that he would give it his all, catching Shima by surprise with his sheer enthusiasm. Shima hesitated inwardly, reflecting on how Toro possessed the knight skill and Jiro the warrior skill, while 7-year-old Ryu was rumored to hold non-combat abilities like jack of all trades and appraisal. Interrupting his doubts, The instructor sternly warned Shima never to underestimate an opponent before a fight, prompting the boy to snap back to attention and raise his defense. Shouting a battle cry, Shima charged forward with his wooden sword raised high, ready to strike. In the blink of an eye, the match was declared over as Shima lay collapsed face first on the ground, leaving Ryu staring in stunned disbelief at his swift victory. He stared down at his outstretched hand in quiet realization, wondering if the strange power he had just unleashed was truly what he suspected. Sitting alone in his quarters, Shima stared at his hands in frustration, processing his decisive defeat. He had trained tirelessly with the ambition to serve the landmark family, yet during their match, he could not land a single blow. He reflected on how Toro was already a knight, Jiro possessed an elite combat class despite being younger, and Ryu, 3 years his junior, had completely outclassed him in physical ability and skill. As the defeated boy gripped his wooden sword tightly, Ryu observed him with a lingering sense of guilt, wondering if winning so overwhelmingly had been a mistake. Upon reflection, Ryu realized that his frequent training sessions against his absurdly powerful father and brothers had unknowingly triggered limit breaks, elevating his sword, spear, and hand-to-hand skills without his knowledge. Looking at his status display, the young reincarnate pondered his progress. Normally, a jack of all trades would see negligible combat gains, yet his combat stats had reached G+ across multiple disciplines. Watching the quiet boy across from him, he genuinely hoped the loss had not shattered the youth's confidence. Suddenly, the older boy stepped forward, stammering nervously as he tried to find the right words, catching Ryu completely off guard. Bowing deeply at 90 degrees, he shouted a passionate apology for his behavior during their sword sparring session. He openly confessed that he had severely underestimated everyone in the household, leaving Ryu wide-eyed in utter surprise. Fired up determination, the boy proclaimed that he finally understood the grandeur of the landmark family, promising to cast aside his former arrogance and devote himself entirely to serving Ryu. Caught off balance by the unexpected wave of enthusiasm, Ryu meekly agreed, hoping they could simply get along. Sometime later out in the forest, Ryu brought down a game bird with a single, precise arrow shot. His new companion showered him with endless praise, marveling at how Ryu excelled at everything while admitting his own complete incompetence with a bow. Walking back with their catch, Ryu noted internally how easily the boy had fallen into the role of an overly affectionate younger brother. He recalled how Toro and Jiro had expressed concern over Ryu wandering off alone, realizing they had deliberately tasked the boy with accompanying him. His companion enthusiastically insisted on carrying the hunted birds himself. Ryu realized his older brothers had essentially dumped a chaperone on him. Though finding the constant flattery a bit overwhelming, he decided that having the eager boy around was not so bad after all. He stood at the edge of Nidai village, surveying the lush agricultural land where new crops were taking root. Inspecting the fields alongside Shima and a local farmer, Ryu observed the kohin trees that had been successfully transplanted from the forest without dying, noting that while those were thriving, the freshly seeded fields would still require another 2 to 3 years before reaching stable production. Assuring the cautious farmer that he would support them by purchasing whatever harvest they gathered from the forest in the meantime, Ryu listened as the worker voiced lingering doubts about whether they would actually find consistent buyers in the future. The triumphant grin, Ryu revealed that their partner trading company was already clamoring for more supply, leaving the local farmer entirely baffled by the strange business terminology being thrown around, muttering to himself about grinding the beans into powder before catching himself sounding far too suspicious. Ryu quickly backtracked and brushed off his slip of the tongue while the farmer looked on in complete confusion. Wrapping up their inspection for the day, Ryu and Shima agreed to head home, only to be interrupted when a passing villager suddenly called out to them. The woman pointed out that Shima had recently gotten into a physical altercation with her older brother, prompting a nervous Shima to sweat heavily and try to downplay the scrap as a minor disagreement. Lecturing his new companion sternly, Ryu reminded Shima that someone trained in martial arts should never engage in bare-knuckle brawls with ordinary civilians, prompting Shima to earnestly promise he had turned over a new leaf. Pleased with the response, Ryu nonchalantly remarked that it was good he had washed his feet, casually employing old underworld slang for for leaving a life of trouble behind. Grabbing Ryu by the shoulder with a bemused expression, Shima pointed out just how bizarre and unfamiliar his young master's choice of words could be. Tilting his head in confusion over the strange phrase, the young swordsman prompts his master to explain, leading the young lord to lightheartedly brush it off as mere professional jargon that outsiders simply would not understand. Impressed by the explanation, the boy sparkles with admiration, completely unaware that his companion is inwardly lamenting his inability to shake off vocabulary habits from his former life. Keeping his secrets strictly guarded, the young lord reminds himself that he can never reveal the truth of his reincarnation to anyone. Beyond their personal conversation, the broader geography of the domain stretches out, showing Daichi Village, where the families of both Sebastian and his young companion reside, situated near Landmark Town, directly across from Nidai Village and the Forest of Evil. Since they are currently in Daichi Village, the young master suggests visiting his companion's home, noting that live-in staff have not been back in a month, and hands over this month's interest payment, though the boy quietly declines the visit. Clenching his fists with fierce resolve, he vows to endure staying away until he becomes a fully independent man, despite his master pointing out how remarkably close their houses actually are. Continuing through the village, their path leads them directly to the warm greeting of the Daichi village chief. Welcoming them inside his home, the elder reveals that he had originally planned to travel to the main lord's estate regarding a situation in Nidai village, but held off upon hearing that the young master had personally taken charge of the matter. The chief elaborates that rumors have spread regarding the Landmark family providing special financial support and resources to specific farmers for a new crop, causing growing resentment among Daichi villagers who feel overlooked. A revelation that immediately clarifies the source of tension for the young lord. Understanding how the arrangement looked to outsiders, he politely clarifies that the opportunity was specifically offered to families struggling with debt as a way to earn their payments, reassuring the chief that it was never a matter of favoritism. Carefully explained that the crop project was merely an experimental test, which the village chief quietly acknowledged. Leaning forward intently, the old chief pressed further, asking if the young lord held high expectations for the harvest. Sensing trouble as the chief grew eager, he nervously stammered that raising the crop from scratch would take several long years. As he attempted to downplay the initiative, a sudden rattle shook the table. Chief passionately begged to join the cultivation efforts, forcing the boy to frantically object that their estate lacked further funds. The old man offered his empty fields. He countered that available land did not solve the lack of financial backing. Chief insisted on using fallow land without burdening the noble family, leaving the young lord thoroughly outmaneuvered. Reluctantly agreeing to present the idea to his father, he departed with Shima, worn out yet relieved to have unexpectedly gained willing farmers. Gathered in a grave council, the estate's key advisors and family members took their seats as the urgency of their situation was formally acknowledged. Clasping his head in sheer desperation, Jiro agonized over how to rebuild the Landmark family's strained finances, crying out for any good ideas. Acknowledging that progress was being made thanks to Jiro's efforts, Farron reminded everyone that tight financial recovery still lay ahead, leaving the room humming in deep deliberation. Farron stressed that they had no spare funds left this year after investing heavily in cultivating Kohin beans, while Jiro noted that a successful future harvest should sustain them through next year. As they weighed their options, one advisor pointed out that their land had been naturally barren for years, making it unrealistic to expect harvests comparable to neighboring domains. Council members sat in contemplative silence as they weighed the severe financial constraints weighing upon the estate. Suddenly, Jiro reacted in complete shock as a startling revelation or proposal was presented to him. Leaning in with intense curiosity, he demanded to know what specific method could possibly solve their agricultural crisis. Looking out across the estate's vast open landscape, the weight of the proposed solution began to settle over the conversation. Directing the estate's workers out in the fields, the young boy energetically instructed everyone to mix fallen leaves into the soil, implementing a revolutionary agricultural technique. As he listens attentively, the young noble explains the fundamentals of soil enrichment to his companion, clarifying that fallen leaves decompose into rich fertilizer after Shima questions whether burying dead foliage serves any real purpose. He illustrates how the thriving Kohin fields benefit from forest leaves mixed into the earth, replicating the naturally fertile soil of the surrounding woods. Shima reflects on his time hunting in the forest, recalling how he noticed the unique soil quality and subsequently urged the local farmers to try incorporating fallen leaves into their crops. Young companion expresses admiration for Lord Farron, who chose to present the composting technique to village chiefs as a respectful suggestion rather than an absolute decree. Jiro beams with pride over his father's considerate leadership, both boys uniting in hope that this new agricultural method will yield a generous harvest. Watching the villagers till the land in early summer, Jiro acknowledges that while the precise impact remains uncertain, taking action is far better than doing nothing at all. Across the fields, hard-working villagers strain under the weight of oversized sacks, laboriously gathering and carrying foliage by hand. Recognizing how agonizingly slow and arduous manual transport is, Jiro wistfully wishes he had access to modern machinery like trucks or excavators. Dismissing heavy motor vehicles as impossible in this world, Jiro resolves to design a practical alternative and head straight for the town workshop. Bowing deeply, Jiro earnestly pleads with the village carpenter and blacksmith to collaborate on a new invention, promising to pay them as soon as funds allow until the moved craftsmen readily agree. He listened as the local craftsmen eagerly agreed to build the project, motivated both by the intrinsic appeal of the design and their deep-seated gratitude toward the landmark family. Overwhelmed with emotion, the young boy expressed his heartfelt gratitude, fully recognizing that his family's respectable standing had made this partnership possible. He immediately set to work inside the workshop, refining the structural blueprints by adding iron plates to reinforce the wheel and adjusting specific frame components for durability. A week later, he returned to the workshop, where the enthusiastic artisans rushed him inside to unveil the finished prototype, praised as a magnificent piece of engineering. Demonstrating the completed wheelbarrow, the craftsman easily transported heavy sacks, proving how much simpler heavy lifting becomes compared to manual haulage. Delighted by the exquisite craftsmanship, complete with anti-slip handles, he showered the master artisans with praise for exceeding his expectations. While the craftsmen discussed building more units for their own workshops, the young visionary began pondering the vast commercial potential of his new invention. He subsequently visited the Merchant Guild, securing official patent approval for the wheelbarrow while receiving a commercial offer from a familiar merchant. Shaking hands firmly with the merchant, he openly admitted his lack of personal capital while eagerly inviting direct financial investment into the production. Soon after, citizens across the town were actively utilizing the new wheelbarrows, transforming everyday labor and transport throughout the region. As the news of the wheelbarrows spread across town, Bosco greeted Ryu warmly, thanking him for the investment that allowed them to expand production and set up new sales channels. Bosco expressed his eagerness to expand sales beyond the landmark domain, a prospect that filled Ryu with immense excitement. As they reached their destination, Ryu noted that he would need his father's permission first, which Bosco readily agreed to wait for as the smooth adoption of their creation continued. However, inside the workshop, a sudden crisis emerged as the craftsmen frantically reported that influx of orders had completely overwhelmed their production capacity. To solve the bottleneck, Ryu proposed dividing the labor into specialized assembly roles rather than having a single craftsman build an entire unit from scratch. This implementation of division of labor simplified each worker's task, soaring productivity and creating new jobs throughout the entire town. Townspeople from all walks of life found new opportunities, earning extra income in their spare time between seasonal harvests to afford livestock and celebrate their newfound stability. The elder craftsman chuckled in amazement at the unprecedented lump sum of money earned before the harvest, continually impressed by the young master's brilliance. Reviewing the domain's financial growth, Sebastian noted how secure the landmark family's future was looking. while plans were set to train the next generation to support Ryu's leadership. Acknowledging the exceptional talents of the young heirs, Sebastian suggested offering praise to Ryu, just as a knock echoed at the door inquiring where he had gone. He stood near the doorway as Ryu entered, inviting his son to join the meeting regarding the estate's crop yields. Farron praised Ryu's past suggestions for improving the soil, which guaranteed a rich harvest, leaving the young boy beaming with pride as the conversation shifted to the Kohin fields. Continuing his detailed assessment, Farron proposed reinvesting their current profits into expanding Kohin bean cultivation, viewing it as the estate's future economic lifeline. While his attendants listened intently, he contemplated the formidable obstacles ahead, noting that clearing dense forest land, uprooting stumps, and leveling the terrain would require a massive undertaking. Upon hearing his father's concerns, the young boy smiled brightly and offered his assistance with the land development. As the pioneering efforts got underway, spirits were high across the settlement. The fields had yielded the bountiful harvest the region had seen in a decade, securing vital tax revenue for the domain. With the crop gathering well underway, plans were already moving forward to build a dedicated processing facility for the valuable beans. Enhanced by the steady profits generated from their newly introduced wheelbarrows, the construction of the processing plant was estimated to take roughly 2 months. Anticipation grew as every detail of the preparations fell perfectly into place. Once the harvest settled down, the next phase involved clearing a vast stretch of forest to expand the farmland share between both local villages. Expressing his confidence, the young lord encouraged the workers, promising to lend his full support to the arduous task ahead. He gathered the entire workforce at the edge of the dense woodland under the clear morning sky. Addressing the crowd of gathered villagers, he began laying out the blueprint for the massive land clearance project. He surprised the assembled men by announcing that none of them would need to chop down a single tree, taking the burden of felling the forest entirely upon himself. Instead, he asked the bewildered workers to focus their strength on hauling away logs, trimming branches, organizing storage, and leveling the ground after he finished, leaving the crowd completely baffled. Skeptical whispers rippled through the crowd of laborers as they questioned whether a young boy could possibly uproot massive trees single-handedly without axes. Unbothered by their doubts, he casually stepped toward the nearest towering trunk to begin. Pressing his hands against the bark, he summoned his magic and cast Earth Pike, forcing a massive pillar of earth to surge upward from beneath the roots with a violent crash. Immense force creaked through the dense wood, loosening the deep-set roots from the soil beneath his touch. Without missing a beat, he activated his storage magic directly against the massive trunk. The heavy thud, the colossal tree toppled over cleanly, completely uprooted and lying motionless on the grass, leaving the watching villagers frozen in utter astonishment. He continues to effortlessly cast his spells, leaving the surrounding onlookers utterly flabbergasted by his immense speed. Seeing the young master work so relentlessly, the chief calls on the villagers to hurry up and carry away the fallen trees so they do not fall behind. Spurred into action, the laborers quickly begin sawing, chopping, and hauling the timber to clear the ground. As he continues his work, he informs Shima that his magic reserve is nearing its limit, prompting Shima to acknowledge his efforts. Without missing a beat, he pulls out a small potion vial and drinks its contents to restore his mana. He immediately sticks out his tongue in disgust, finding the taste of the restoration potion absolutely dreadful. Shima asks about his condition. He flexes his hand and assures him that drinking it is better than collapsing from total magic depletion. Surrounding himself with dozens of bottled potions, he proudly announces he is fully stocked, leaving Shima amazed at his ability to brew magic recovery medicine. Reflecting on his past trials gathering forest herbs to craft effective potions, he readies himself to push forward with the clearing effort. With renewed energy and full cooperation from the workers, the massive clearing project makes rapid progress across the dense forest. Suddenly heard the voice of the world declaring that his magic storage limit had been expanded through limit break. Excited by the system announcement, the boy pumped his fist in celebration at his newly expanded capacity. Realizing this meant he could achieve far more than before, he enthusiastically patted his stomach, eager to test his expanded limits. Instead of storing items individually as he did before, he cast Earth Pike and touched multiple pillars simultaneously, storing them all at once. Finding plenty of capacity left, he swiftly cleared whole stands of trees in bulk, leaving his father utterly astonished at how quickly the entire land was cleared. Handing over the project report, the young lord confirmed that work in both villages was completed days ahead of schedule and under budget, before taking his leave to prepare for the harvest festival. Left standing alone with the astonishing report, his father could only stare in speechless wonder as the door closed. Pondering ways to make the upcoming festival even more exciting, he ruled out seafood stall options and settled on a classic treat, candy apples. Sudden, shocked cry echoed out from the estate grounds. To his utter dismay, the head chef informed him that sugar was an extremely rare and expensive commodity, making it impossible to secure enough for a festival stall. He refused to be disheartened by the sugar shortage, clenching his fist with renewed determination as a clever backup plan took shape in his mind. Memories from his past life came flooding back, recalling how a senior worker had once explained the process of creating sweet starch syrup by sprouting barley into malt and combining it with porridge made from glutinous grains. Realizing that livestock feed grains like barley and glutinous rice were readily available in this world, he calculated that he could produce traditional starch syrup to make Rigo candy apples without needing refined sugar at all. The process proved surprisingly straightforward. Boiling down the rich starch syrup, dipping the fresh Rigo fruit to coat it thoroughly, and letting it dry to a hard, glossy sheen before handing a prototype over for a taste test. The crisp, satisfying crunch. The young tester took her first bite of the glistening treat. Her eyes lit up with absolute delight as she beamed, overwhelmed by the intense sweetness of the candied fruit. Surrounding onlookers gasped in mouth-watering awe at the glowing review. Confident in the recipe's success, he rallied the group to begin full preparations for the harvest festival, noting that his newly expanded magic storage capacity would allow them to mass-produce and store as many candy apples as they needed. After hours of hard labor, he wiped the sweat from his brow, gazing upon row after row of perfectly glazed Rigo candies neatly arranged across the counter. Looking over the staggering volume of sweets, one of the children chuckled softly, remarking that seeing so many candies in one place surprisingly took away the urge to sneak a quick bite. Having completed their hard work, the group looked out over the bustling harvest festival, where townsfolk gathered eagerly to spend their hard-earned coins on festive treats. Before long, a massive crowd began gathering around one specific stall as cheerful voices called out, urging passersby to come take a closer look. At the counter, Toro enthusiastically promoted their creation, explaining that these delicious treats were crispy Rigo fruit coated in a glossy, sugary glaze, priced at just 5 copper coins each. The crowd gasped in disbelief at the mention of sugar candy, skeptical that such young boys could offer something so luxurious at such an affordable price. Seeing their hesitation, Jiro urged the skeptical customers to simply give it a taste first, assuring them that this special batch was crafted specifically for today's festival on a first-come, first-served basis. Instantly convinced by the dazzling appearance of the glazed fruit, customers rushed forward, eager to buy candy apples for themselves and their families. As they took their first bites, the crowd marveled at how perfectly the tartness of the Rigo fruit paired with the rich sweetness, leaving Jiro beaming with delight over the hit success. Demand was so overwhelming that all 200 prepared candy apples were sold out in a flash, leaving the stall completely cleared. Reflecting on the whirlwind day, Toro and Jiro shared a warm smile, knowing that despite all the tiring effort, bringing such happiness to everyone made it entirely worthwhile. The successful sale behind them, Jiro turned to praise his companions, thanking Toro and Shima for their invaluable help in making the venture a triumph. He handed out the remaining glossy candy apples to his young helpers with a cheerful smile, offering one to each of them as a reward for their hard work. Surprised by the gesture, Toro gasped as he looked down at the unexpected treats sitting before them. Realizing they had been so busy selling to the crowd that they had forgotten to try the sweet treats themselves, the boys shared a hearty laugh over their oversight. Watching his companions eagerly bite into the candied apples and praise the delicious flavor, he smiled warmly, contented with the success of their festival venture. As the festival drew to a close, distant voices echoed with resolve to keep working hard so their domain could prosper and hold even grander celebrations in the future. Meanwhile, in the neighboring Alanza barony, news of the landmark territory's recent prosperity began to spread among the local townsfolk. Merchants on the street actively gossiped about the landmark domain's incredible momentum, discussing their popular sugar candies, noble coffee trade, and novel wheelbarrows. Inside a passing carriage, an aristocrat clicked his tongue in irritation as he overheard the glowing praise regarding his neighbor's rising success. Kohin fields have yielded their very first harvest. Although many trees were still maturing and only a small fraction was expected to yield fruit, the harvest ultimately exceeded all expectations. Inside the study, Farron discussed the logistics with a merchant, realizing full-scale shipments would have to wait until next year while land clearing continued. Surprised by the proposed figures, Farron voiced his concern, asking if the market price was being set a bit too high. Merchant explained that with supply unable to keep up with intense demand, a higher price was natural, though he emphasized that building a strong foundational yield remained the true long-term priority. Landmark family's prestige continued to grow among neighboring nobles, recognized both for introducing useful innovations like the wheelbarrow and as the sole source of the popular dark powder known as coffee. The merchant proposed this season's trading rate. Farron contemplated visiting their patron, Margrave Sugawella, to offer a courtesy gift of the freshly harvested product. Jiro and Farron exchanged astonished looks upon hearing the astonishing financial returns generated by their recent ventures. The exceptional reputation of their last coffee batch driving trading prices up tenfold, alongside lucrative contracts for starch syrup, shovels, and new patents, the revenue was staggering. Preparing for his journey, Farron accepted a neatly packaged box of coffee souvenir from Ryu beside their waiting carriage. Holding the gift securely, Farron announced his departure to offer year-end greetings, placing the domain's oversight in young Ryu's hands until his return. As he set off toward the Margrave's domain, Jiro and Toro enthusiastically waved goodbye, wishing him a safe journey. Watching the carriage disappear, Jiro quietly wished he could have gone along, only to notice an unexpected visitor arriving at the estate. Sudden arrival of a messenger on the very day of their scheduled visit outraged the young lord, though Kamiza urged him to remain calm. He discussed Baronet Alanza, a neighbor who consistently leveraged his rank and age to lord over Farza. The heavy sigh over the impending hassle, Kamiza prepared to face the arrogant noble pulling up outside. Baronet Alanza stepped out, instantly mocking the estate's lingering air of poverty. Kamiza confronted him with a sharp retort regarding his stench, surprising Alanza, who demanded to know why the former head was receiving him instead of Farza. Amused, Kamiza chuckled that Alanza's plan to harass his son had completely failed due to his late arrival. Alanza hypocritically scolded Kamiza for his rudeness, pushing Jiro to exasperation at the visitor's sheer nerve. Bothered, Kamiza pointed out that Farza was already with the Margrave and demanded to know the true purpose of Alanza's visit. He stood his ground while Baronet Alanza flusteredly insisted that he had merely arrived ahead of schedule. Watching the pompous noble scramble to justify his early arrival, Jiro realized the man had clearly been scheming to catch them off guard. Interrupting the bluster, Kamiza bluntly invited the unannounced guest inside so they wouldn't have to air their suspicions out in the open. Jiro internally lamented his grandfather's overly polite hospitality, though they soon settled into the formal reception room. Taking a slow sip of the served black tea, Alanza openly marveled at its incredible aroma and flavor, recognizing it as the luxurious beverage nobles had been whispering about. Realizing Lord Farza was absent, the greedy noble resolved to simply intimidate the children into giving up the secret production process, leaving Jiro utterly stunned by his sheer shamelessness. Because of this arrogant behavior, Kamiza immediately shut him down, stating flatly that they had no intention of handing over their secrets. Insulted by the refusal, the baronet sneered and told the retired elder to stay out of the conversation, claiming the children were the ones in charge while Farza was away. Jiro glared in disbelief at how utterly impudent the guest was being. Stepping forward to shield his family, he reminded Alanza that the head of the household was absent and that simply demanding their trade secrets went far beyond neighboring courtesy. Toro watched in awe as his usually gentle brother stood firm against the noble's pressure. In response, Alanza argued that as fellow vassals under Margrave Sugawella, Sharing beneficial information was only natural. But Jiro cut him off with a crisp refusal. Continuing his counterattack, he pointed out that only Margrave Sugawella possessed the authority to make such a call, and that no mere vassal had the right to make decisions on the domain's behalf. An icy glow in his eyes, he boldly questioned if Baronet Alanza believed he possessed the power to disregard the Margrave's authority altogether, leaving the noble choking on his words. Seizing the opening, Kamiza thoughtfully stroked his chin, noting that Alanza's aggressive demands certainly sounded treasonous, and musing aloud that he might just have to report this conversation directly to Margrave Sugawella. His reputation as a favored ally of Margrave Sugawella carries immense weight, leaving Baronet Alanza squirming as he realizes a direct report could completely ruin his standing. Cornered by the threat, the Baronet instantly changes his tune, laughing off his aggressive demands as a mere joke before hastily making an excuse to leave and pay his respects elsewhere. Moments later, the young boy stands outside, watching as the nobleman's horse-drawn carriage rolls away down the dirt road, bringing a temporary end to the extortion attempt. To ensure no lingering bad omen remains, Fariza explains the traditional practice of sprinkling salt for purification, prompting the maid to enthusiastically hurl salt at the threshold while yelling for the shameless guest to never return. A few days later, a cheerful voice brightens the household as Farron returns from his duties alongside Toro, warmly greeting everyone as he steps through the front door. While greeting them, Jiro's attention catches something concerning, prompting Toro to mention that trouble seems to have followed them home. Jiro's absolute shock, standing right behind his father with a smug expression, is none other than Baronet Alanza himself. The young boy stares in disbelief, astonished by the sheer audacity of the man who had retreated in disgrace only days prior, now casually striding back into their estate. As the unwanted guest walks inside, accompanied by Farron, a chilling and sinister aura seems to ripple through the air, signaling underlying danger. Sensing the gravity of the situation, Toro quickly pulls Jiro aside out of earshot, whispering that they need to talk privately. He stood alongside Jiro, demanding to know why the unwanted guest had accompanied him. Farron went on to recount how the conversation had begun with simple small talk before Alanza brought up his own financial troubles from a poor harvest, asking to borrow money. Although Farron initially declined, the noble shamelessly played on his sympathy, making it nearly impossible for him to stand firm. Farron admitted to giving in and agreeing to lend a small amount. Toro palmed his face in exasperation at his father's gentle nature. Hearing this, Jiro realized with a jolt of panic that he could not simply stand by and watch. Abruptly bolting past his bewildered family, Jiro sprinted toward the front hall. As the person quietly managing the landmark family's accounts, he determined that no money would change hands without his direct oversight. Bursting through the doorway with urgent strides, Ryu reached out towards his father, pleading for him to wait before proceeding any further. Inside the room, Baronet Alanza sat comfortably across from Lord Farza, while Sebastian stood ready to serve tea to the gathering. Alanza immediately barked in frustration at the child's sudden intrusion during such an important meeting, calling into question his upbringing, though Farza simply asked his young son what was wrong. Ryu firmly argued that proper courtesy must be maintained even among friends, demanding that Alanza sign an official IOU if he intended to borrow money, a concept that visibly outraged the visiting nobleman. Farza admitted his son raised a valid point, noting that putting the loan and repayment terms in writing would protect the delicate relationship between their neighboring domains. Turning to Ryu, Farza instructed him to draw up the contract immediately. Farza proudly reassured the visitor that Ryu regularly managed their ledgers to improve the family's finances, and in seconds, the boy cheerfully held up the finished document. Calm efficiency, Ryu presented the document and feather pen, requesting signatures from both noblemen to finalize the agreement. Though Alanza grumbled under his breath at being outmaneuvered by a child, he leaned over and reluctantly placed his signature on the line. Holding up the signed document, Ryu formally declared that the loan was now officially recorded and binding. He offered a chillingly pleasant smile as he delivered his parting warning, making it clear that when the due date arrived, he would personally ensure the debt was collected without exception. Baronet Alanza clutched his teeth in bitter frustration as his carriage rattled away from the manor, utterly defeated in his attempt to exploit the family. Watching the carriage depart in a hurry, Sebastian observed that borrowing money without proper collateral had likely been the baronet's intention from the very beginning. Toro and his brother erupted with glee, giving Ryu enthusiastic high fives for managing to put such a humiliated expression on Alanza's face. Barza offered his sincere gratitude to his son, admitting that the formal contract only existed because Ryu had stepped in, while Sebastian quietly noted that the head of the house needed to be far more vigilant. The formal IOU secured to prevent future predatory loans. One of the household maids vigorously scattered salt across the threshold to cleanse the manor of the unwanted visitor's lingering presence. Ryu flashed a confident thumbs up, thoroughly impressed by the maid's swift and thorough dedication to purifying the domain. As time passed and the new year arrived, the landmark territory celebrated the fresh start, with Ryu taking his young sister Hana out into town for a relaxed outing together. Reflecting on his past life in an orphanage, Ryu cherished the chance to finally have a true younger sibling, marveling at how 5-year-old Hana was remarkably thoughtful despite her young age. Determined to give her a wonderful day, he smiled brightly, eager to devote all his energy to playing with Hana as they explored the busy market stalls. He and his little sister strolled through the lively street market, where a friendly merchant greeted young Ryu and Hana, offering a freshly grilled skewer to the young girl. The vendor beamed as she accepted it with a bright, polite thank you. Seeing her impeccable manners, he could not help but puff out his chest in pride, delighted by how well-behaved his younger sister was as they continued their walk. He happily reminisced about the incredible crafts they saw at the woodworker's shop while he stored their new souvenirs safely into his spatial magic storage, only to be interrupted by Toro and a group of local children approaching them, led by Toro and Shima. For boys from the neighborhood gathered tightly around the pair, blocking their path with unusually stern expressions. Shielding Hana behind him, he demandingly asked what they wanted, to which Toro respectfully addressed him with great gravity. Suddenly, all 4 boys bowed deeply at the waist in unison, dramatically begging him to accept them as his loyal followers. Toro boldly claimed to be the #1 follower. Shima immediately shouted back in protest, prompting an exasperated sigh from the young lord, who flatly refused to take on any followers at all. Softening his stance, he proposed that while he would not be their boss, they could all be friends instead, provided they promised to be kind to Hana and include her in their games. Boys cheered with wild enthusiasm at the prospect of serving boss Ryu, causing him to instantly yell in frustration that he was still not their boss. Hana clutched her hands together in pure joy over making new friends, and seeing her happiness made him smile warmly, deciding to join them for a safe game of tag. He suggested playing hide-and-seek today, explaining to the group how one person is chosen to be it while the others run off to hide. Children enthusiastically scattered across the town square, dashing between buildings and ducking behind barrels as the game began. After trying games like freeze tag and shadow tag, the local boys marvels at how fun these new activities are, praising their young leader as they wave goodbye at the end of the day. As the siblings happily say their farewells, passing travelers mention how prosperous this small domain seems compared to Baronet Alanza's land, noting they didn't even need to buy extra supplies there. Overhearing their conversation, he quickly realizes that Baronet Alanza must have lied about having a poor harvest just to borrow money from a struggling neighboring territory. Dark, scheming expression crosses his face as he vows internally to be completely merciless and collect every single coin owed when the time comes. Noticing his sudden change in demeanor, the little girl asks if something is wrong, prompting him to snap back to his senses and play it off as nothing. With harmony restored, the trio begins walking down the peaceful street together to head home before dusk falls. Spring arrived, a significant shift was ushered in for the Landmark family. A courier arrived at their estate, delivering news that would mark the beginning of a new chapter for everyone. Excitedly, Jiro gathered the family, holding up a newly received letter and shouting out that word had finally arrived from his elder brother, Toro. Since earlier that year, the eldest brother, Toro, had been attending an elite school in the city of the Margrave of Skra, the top academy in the southeastern region of the kingdom, attracting students from far and wide. Because he was residing in a dormitory, the family kept in touch through a steady stream of letters. Surprised by the latest update, Jiro read aloud to his listening parents and siblings. The letter revealed that Toro had secured first place in the midterm examinations across academics, martial arts, and magic. His father noted proudly that while inherent skills played a role, such a feat was truly the result of relentless hard work. Reflecting on his brother's success, Jiro felt confident that Toro would excel, while looking forward to his own enrollment in 2 years' time as he asked what else the correspondence detailed. Reading further, Jiro discovered that Toro had made numerous friends across various social backgrounds, including the son of Viscount Bunin from the south, who had become both a companion and a noble rival. While his mother and tutor remarked on how much Toro was growing and enjoying his student life, Farron's expression darkened with a quiet, underlying regret as he held the paper tightly. Overwhelmed by frustration, Farron lamented internally that everything ultimately came down to financial resources, believing that with sufficient money, they could have sent Toro to an even grander institution in the royal capital. Dejected, he quietly apologized to his eldest son for not working harder to provide greater opportunities. But Jiro looked on, aware of his father's inner burden. Watched as the young boys resolved to train even harder so as not to fall behind Toro, though one of them secretly admitted to having additional thoughts on his mind. Following that day, both Jiro and his companion dedicated themselves to rigorous study and martial training, engaging in intense wooden sword sparring matches until their instructor called a draw, leaving one of them frustrated by the widening gap in their skills. Their progress in magic was equally remarkable. Jiro had even mastered intermediate area healing magic, leading his friend to praise him as nothing short of a genius who would soon surpass everyone, though Jiro modestly brushed off the compliments. Determined to keep pushing forward, Jiro relied on his acquired skill, increased experience received from God, hoping it would assist him as he diligently pursued his daily training. Acknowledging their remarkable growth, Farron praised both boys for their drastic improvement, surprising Shima with his high evaluation of their efforts. Farron continued to express his pride as a parent, reminding Shima that he would be entering school the following year and urging him to study hard for it. It was decided that the Landmark family would fund Shima's enrollment in the same academy as Toro, though the boy hesitated, wondering if it was truly acceptable. Unaccustomed to such generosity, Shima questioned whether a commoner like himself deserved to attend such a prestigious school, as Farron placed a reassuring hand on his head. Farron reassured him by explaining that the academy hosted many commoners, prompting Shima to overcome his doubts and passionately vow to study hard and devote himself to the Landmark family, promising sons and a dedicated retainer in training. The future of the Landmark house looked brighter and more secure than ever. As time passed and new arrangements were settled, young Ryu began his practical magic lessons under his mother's guidance once he reached 8 years of age, eagerly preparing to demonstrate whatever spells he could manage. Focused concentration, he cast Earth Pike, throwing himself wholeheartedly into earnest study now that he had reached the appropriate age. Reflected on his mother Cecil's extraordinary talent, marveling at how a former commoner adventurer possessed rare mastery over wind, lightning, water, and healing magic, nearing the realm of a high-tier special skill like a sage. After evaluating his spell work, she called a halt to the session, acknowledging that his earth magic was by far his strongest trait, even though his relentless efforts to clear the nearby woods had frequently pushed him to the brink of total mana exhaustion. Those exhausting efforts paid off immensely, as clearing the massive forest allowed the estate to expand its coffee fields and establish a steady export business for the coming year. Satisfied that his total mana reserves were more than sufficient, she decided to transition his training toward delicate precision and fine mana control. To test his control, she assigned him an unusual task, commanding him to craft life-size stone statues of her image over and over again. Found the task incredibly challenging, struggling to balance proportion while feeling the terrifying, silent pressure of her glare whenever an attempt turned out with misshapen facial features or thick limbs. Refusing to yield under her watchful eyes, he gathered his resolve and focused every ounce of energy into his next attempt. His perseverance paid off as he finally sculpted a flawless likeness, earning warm praise for his vast improvement in mana control. He examined his newly sculpted statuette, inwardly noting that while he had aimed for an exact replica of his mother, the chest had ended up a bit too small, a secret thought he wisely chose to keep to himself before presenting the results to his parents. His refined, fine mana control unlocked, he enthusiastically applied his magical skills to construct a modern indoor toilet complete with a water tank and slimes below to dispose of waste, revolutionary for the estate sanitation. The innovative plumbing invention was met with unanimous praise from his family and servants, drastically improving life in the manor, even if mass-producing the specialized heated toilet bowls proved too difficult for the time being. Building upon this momentum, he set out to pave a smooth, wide stone highway connecting their mansion toward the town, surprising the passing villagers with such efficient public works. As the locals watched the young boy single-handedly repair and expand their roads, they began revering him almost as a benevolent deity, deeply grateful for his efforts to improve their daily lives. Word of the family's kindness and the town's thriving atmosphere spread to neighboring territories, drawing travelers and prospective settlers who sought a better life under the landmark domain. Inside the estate's office, Sebastian reported a surge in immigration requests, explaining to Farron and Ryu that people were fleeing high taxes in neighboring lands to seek refuge under their fair rule. Reflecting on his father's noble leadership, the boy felt relieved to live under a just lord, contrasting him with corrupt nobles like Baronet Alanza who only exploited their subjects. A few months passed as he diligently continued his infrastructure project, wiping sweat from his brow after another long day of hard magical labor. Surveying the sprawling settlement from above, he looked upon the neatly paved streets and organized stone houses with pride at how much progress had been made. He contemplated his next project, deciding to gradually introduce more indoor toilets across the territory, beginning with a public facility despite the tedious process required to craft them. All his companions offered refreshments and gently reminded him not to shoulder every heavy burden alone. His gaze drifted outward toward the vast wilderness stretching beyond the village border. Deep within the uncharted reaches of the surrounding woods lay the demonic forest, a dense and dangerous realm shrouded in ancient peril. Deep among the towering trunks, Lord Kamiza stood in vigilant silence, scanning the shadows of the dense canopy for unseen threats. His quiet monitoring was cut short as a massive, monstrous beast stepped into view, forcing him to quietly acknowledge that a serious predicament had emerged. A heavy, rhythmic thundering echoed across the snow-dusted landscape as a solitary rider urged his mount forward at top speed, charging toward the estate with urgent news. As the rider pulled up beside the training yard where the boys had been practicing archery, they instantly recognized Lord Kamiza atop his steed and called out to him in surprise. Sensing the dire gravity of the situation, the head of the house stepped out to meet the winded elder, who immediately demanded that an emergency hands-on quest be posted at the Adventurers Guild. In response to his son's inquiry about the threat, Kamiza reported that a massive horde of up to 800 orcs was advancing, far exceeding what a solitary patrol could manage. These brutish, pig-like humanoids possessed immense physical strength and looked down on humanity as inferior prey, prompting the Lord to order an immediate mobilization of the domain's armed forces. Without missing a beat, he instructed Sebastian to alert the guild while the rest of the household sprang into frantic motion. The southern region of the landmark domain bordered the demonic frontier, an unmapped wilderness densely populated by dangerous monsters that made expansion a constant ordeal. Though Kamiza normally kept those wild borderlands secure on his routine patrols, the overwhelming sheer volume of beasts forced him to beat a retreat and call for backup. Addressing the boys, he commanded Ryu to accompany his grandfather to the southern line and raise a defensive earth wall alongside Shima, while Jiro was assigned to stay behind and reserve to tend to any incoming wounded. Moments later, the urgent order reached the Adventurers Guild, where a messenger burst through the doors announcing an emergency quest issued directly by the Landmark family. Listened intently as chatter erupted across the guild hall, with adventurers coming to the grim realization that a direct request from the Lord himself meant severe peril was imminent. Learning that the operation was a joint effort alongside the famous Lord Kamiza and the Landmark family, an excited group of mercenaries eagerly volunteered their blades for the cause. The crowd, seasoned warriors, explained the legendary reputation of the red-haired ogre, a former A-rank adventurer who had risen from commoner to knight through sheer battlefield prowess, fought side by side with Lord Farza. Inspired by the legendary names involved, more adventurers joined in with enthusiastic shouts, eager for the chance to fight alongside such renowned figures. Meanwhile, out at the forest perimeter, the advance team arrived on horseback to inspect the construction zone. Directing the effort, Lord Kamiza instructed Shima to rest while ordering Ryu to build a low earthen wall connecting the tall tree to the distant rocks, saving his own mana for the grander defensive works. Nodding in agreement, the young boy channeled his elemental magic, raising a formidable barrier of stone and earth high into the air with surprising ease. Observing the impressive result, Lord Kamiza gladly accepted a bottle of homemade mana recovery potion offered to him to boost his reserves before commencing his own casting. Chugging down the elixir, the veteran knight began channeling his massive mana into the ground, unleashing a staggering tremor that caused the very earth to surge upward. Having drained the potion completely, he instantly demanded another, leaving the young magic caster speechless at the immense scale of power on display. He watched as Lord Kamiza finished off the brew, grimacing slightly at the foul flavor, yet praising the boy's surprising apothecary skill. The veteran's booming laughter quickly washed away the heavy tension hanging over them. Setting the empty vessel aside, Kamiza shifted his focus back toward the tree line, his voice adopting a quiet, resolute tone as he prepared for what was to come. Seated cross-legged on the dirt, the veteran warrior took a moment of quiet reflection, his sharp gaze fixed straight ahead as he gathered his thoughts. Dressing Ryu beside him, Kamiza admitted that while the enemy's overwhelming numbers were initially daunting, the key lay in analyzing whoever was commanding the horde. Cautioned that hesitation or fear against such a vast army of orcs meant defeat before the battle even began. Absolute victory demanded charging straight in to take the general's head. Pondering the strategy, Ryu suggested a preemptive strike, prompting Kamiza to look over with a knowing smirk and ask if the boy was reading his mind, to which Ryu firmly agreed. Heavy rumble suddenly echoed through the forest, catching their attention just as a convoy of rallied adventurers emerged from the tree line, right on schedule. The approaching warriors marched onward with grim determination, fully aware of how severely outnumbered they were, yet steadfast in their duty. Pointing to his own temple, Kamiza reminded Ryu that battle is ultimate decided by fortitude and strategy, leaving the young boy absorbing the lesson intently. Shouts suddenly broke out along the defense line as scouts came sprinting back through the woods, frantically shouting that the enemy horde was finally approaching. As he listened to the scouts' dire warning, the grim reality of the situation became clear. Roughly 1,000 enemy forces were surging forward, led by a formidable orc king, an orc general, and an elite high orc squad. Shockwaves spread through the ranks at the realization of an A-rank threat, though Kamiza merely rubbed the back of his neck and offered a sheepish apology for misjudging the enemy commander's presence. Without missing a beat, the veteran warrior claimed the orc king as his target, assigning Farza to deal with the general. Addressing the remaining forces, he made it clear that retreat meant destruction for the domain's populace, tasking the frontline soldiers with holding off the horde. Turning to the young boy, he instructed Farza to prepare the signal, while he and the child prepared to devastate the enemy lines with a synchronized assault. Closing his eyes, the boy activated his detection magic, casting search into the surrounding wilderness. Locating the enemy center precisely 80 meters ahead, he relayed the coordinates just as the seasoned commander drew his blade for the charge. Unleashing their combined might, a soaring magical rock lance met a colossal sword strike, unleashing a catastrophic burst of energy that tore through the forest. Watching the staggering destruction carve a wide path through the dense trees, the surrounding soldiers stood awestruck by the legendary power of an A-rank adventurer. As Farza called upon his scout to assess the aftermath, the nearby fighters murmured in astonishment at the child's incredible strength, while the scout activated his hawk eye ability to survey the battlefield. Listened intently as the visual report confirmed the devastation. The High Orc squad had been completely wiped out, though their king remained standing, and roughly 10% of the enemy forces were neutralized. Taking advantage of the opening, the commander ordered the mages to shower the surrounding area with magic, while shock troops prepared to charge directly into the enemy lines. Turning to Jiro, Shima, and their companion, the officer tasked the trio with restoring everyone's magic reserves and treating the wounded before sprinting back toward the front line. Without hesitation, the young support squad went to work, distributing restorative potions and channeling healing energy to keep the frontline warriors fighting. Reinvigorated by the swift aid, the infantrymen carved through the monster hordes with relentless steel. Observing the ruthless momentum, The men marveled at how a path opened up wherever the vanguard duo struck, comparing their fierce prowess to that of true ogres. Soldiers counted themselves fortunate to witness the legendary red-haired ogre and the blood-stained knight battling side by side, until a sudden shift on the battlefield caught their eye. Towering over the chaotic melee, the massive orc general stepped forward with a heavy battle axe in hand, radiating pure malice. Though battered by magical strikes, the behemoth's fighting spirit burned undiminished. Seeing this monster up close, the senior warrior set his sights on the Orc King and left the towering general to his companion. Colossal Brute sneered, mockingly questioning whether the human truly believed he could stand against him. The brutal overhead swing, the general smashed his axe downward, only to meet empty air as a blade flashed past his side, leaving a cold voice whispering in his ear that looking away in battle is fatal. He stood composed over his fallen foe, coldly remarking that the orc general's obvious lack of battle experience had ultimate cost him the fight. Watching the incredible feat from above, the young boys stood in total awe. Shima could barely process how effortlessly the giant commander had been brought down in a single instant. Noticing the wounded down on the battlefield, the young boy urged his companion to hurry down so they could provide healing magic, and the two immediately scrambled down the embankment. Meanwhile, Lord Kamiza found himself locked in combat with a crowned Orc King, who mockingly taunted him as a lowly human while swinging its massive blade. Sparks flew as their heavy weapons collided repeatedly in a furious exchange of strikes. Parrying the immense blows, Kamiza realized this beast had buffed itself with strength and agility magic, threatening to evolve into a full-fledged Orc Emperor at any moment. Monstrous King unleashed a crushing overhead blow that smashed into the ground with explosive force, causing Shima to cry out in terror for his grandfather. As the thick dust began to settle, a figure emerged unharmed from the clearing crater. Exhaling a breath of relief after barely dodging the blow, Kamiza stood ready, prompting the frustrated Orc King to bark orders at his lingering minions to attack. Spurred by their ruler's command, a swarm of lesser orcs let out a piercing screech and charged en masse into the fray. As he watched from behind, a sudden arc of brilliant steel whistled through the air in a single, devastating swing. Baron ducked low and cut down a line of charging orcs in a flash of silver, his eyes locked on the battle with unwavering determination. Misa acknowledged his son's timely arrival, but Farron insisted that he handle the surrounding monsters himself. Recognizing the moment, Kamiza quietly activated his physical and agility enhancement magic. True to his word, the young warrior carved through the remaining horde with effortless precision, keeping the lesser beasts completely at bay. Watching his troops fall so easily, the monstrous Orc King roared in disbelief, unable to fathom how his forces were being cut down by mere humans. Stepping forward with renewed power, Kamiza raised his blade with a confident grin. He declared that the true fight was starting, determined to destroy the Orc King before it could evolve into his injured soldiers lay groaning along the stone passage. Young Jiro took charge of the immediate aftermath, directing his allies to assist the medical personnel treating the wounded. Closing his eyes, the boy raised both hands and focused his internal mana, preparing to unleash a wide-area restorative spell. A radiant burst of light erupted around him as he cast area recovery, illuminating the cave and enveloping the injured combatants in healing energy. Soldiers marveled in astonishment as their open cuts and severe injuries vanished in an instant, restoring their strength entirely. Handing out small glass vials, Jiro distributed magical recovery potions to the frontline fighters, warning them of the bitter taste while offering vital aid. Glancing back at the ongoing clash, he assessed the chaotic battlefield where human defenders balanced evenly against hulking orcs in brutal hand-to-hand combat. He recognized that in terms of sheer muscle, endurance, and raw numbers, the monstrous invaders held a distinct upper hand that would break a prolonged battle of attrition. Clenching his small hand into a tight, trembling fist, a dark determination filled his gaze as he swore to find a weakness and avenge those who dared harm his family. Farther ahead, heavy iron weapons collided with tremendous force as the front lines buckled under the violent assault of the crowned Orc General. Sweat dripped down Lord Kamiza's face as he braced against the onslaught, realizing with growing dread that the enemy commander was rapidly evolving into an Orc Emperor right in the middle of battle. He was acutely aware of the dire threat facing them, as instructions echoed through the streets, urging all nearby citizens to evacuate immediately to safety. Monster's commander taunted him about his fading momentum, but tightening his grip around his hilt, the veteran warrior inwardly lamented the relentless march of age while remaining steadfast in his resolve, recalling how effortlessly he would have ended this clash in his younger days. He locked weapons with the towering adversary in a high-stakes exchange. A sudden, terrifying flash, the immense impact shattered his steel blade into useless fragments. As he cursed his sudden misfortune, his son screamed out in sheer panic upon seeing his father weaponless. The orc general raised his heavy blade to deliver a fatal strike, proclaiming the battle finished. Before the lethal blow could land, Shima invoked his rock lance spell, launching sharp stone projectiles directly into the beast's face and forcing it to recoil in pain. Seizing the brief opening created by the magical assault, the young boy dashed forward at top speed to assist his father, combining their remaining strength in a coordinated counterstrike. Father and son thrust forward together, piercing the giant foe and wringing an agonized howl from its throat. Its crown rolling uselessly onto the dirt, the massive enemy general crashed heavily to the ground, defeated at last. Watched silently alongside his soldiers as the remaining orcs scattered and fled from the battlefield in absolute terror. Victorious soldiers raised their weapons and fists into the air, erupting into ecstatic cheers at the defeat of the monster leader. Exhaling a sigh of exhaustion, the veteran warrior turned as the young boy rushed over, casting healing magic to tend to his wounds. Laughing boisterously while patting the young boy on the head, he praised the child's keen timing that had saved his life. Recalling the harrowing moment when defeat had seemed imminent, the young hero breathed a quiet sigh of relief that he had arrived in time. Observing the boy closely, his father pondered how the child could possess such remarkable battle foresight and tactical judgment at such an age. The threat eliminated, his father offered a warm smile, confident that the domain remained secure, a sentiment shared by the elder lord. Giving his son a hearty pat on the back, the elder lord tasked him with rewarding the troops while he departed to deal with any remaining stragglers. Noticing his father immediately preparing to take on more work, the dutiful child offered to stand by his side and lend his assistance. Surrounded by quiet woods and mountain peaks under clear skies, peace returned to the territory following a miraculous victory. He deployed his vast area recovery magic across the battlefield, treating the wounded so effectively that despite the severity of the casualties, not a single life was lost. News of this incredible feat spread rapidly far beyond the territory's borders, elevating the renown of the landmark family under Margrave Suguila to unprecedented heights. Recognizing that their stand had protected his own lands from being the next target, Margrave Suguila extended lavish praise for the accomplishments of the family's 3 generations. Prompted by this success, the royal court formally approved Margrave Suguila's petition to promote the landmark family up the peerage rank, dispatching an official messenger directly from the capital to deliver the certificate. As the carriage pulled up to the estate, the young brothers eagerly anticipated news of a grand reward while watching their father return. They warmly welcomed Farron home and asked how matters went at the royal capital. His solemn expression suggested there was more to the outcome than expected. Rather than explaining on the spot, Farron requested that everyone in the residence be assembled immediately for a formal announcement. Shortly after, the entire household gathered outside the grand mansion to hear what news had been brought back from the capital. Facing the expectant crowd of family and staff, Farron prepared to share the formal details of the royal decree. He announced that their liege, Margrave Sugula, had been elevated to Marquis, leaving Jiro listening with bated breath to hear what recognition awaited the landmark family. He stood frozen in silent shock as his father proudly declared that the king himself had personally granted their family the prestigious title of Baron. The announcement caused everyone in the room to gasp in disbelief, dumbfounded that they had completely bypassed the rank of baronet to become barons directly. As the young boy processed the monumental news, his father elaborated on the royal decree, explaining that while they now held independent title to protect the border realm, they would remain loyal allies within the Marquis's faction. Beamed with pride, the head of the house made the full scope of their victory clear. With increased territory and independence, They were now high nobles, answering directly to the crown. Overjoyed by the incredible revelation, the family and servants erupted into an enthusiastic cheer, celebrating their newfound status and honor. Word of the elevation spread through the estate's surrounding streets like wildfire, with citizens calling out the unbelievable news to one another in utter excitement. The bustling town square, the common folk gathered in jubilation, declaring a spontaneous festival to toast their lord's remarkable rise in rank. Among the younger residents, excitement buzzed as they eagerly shared the details of the royal decree with wide-eyed wonder. Meanwhile, in stark contrast to the widespread celebrations, Baronet Alanza slammed his fists onto his desk, trembling with rage as he learned of Farron's sudden elevation. The pompous noble fumed in bitter denial. Allies of the house like Kamiza and the local merchant shared warm smiles, rejoicing in the family's well-deserved triumph. As he harbored his bitter resentment elsewhere, outside the grand landmark estate, a lively crowd of villagers gathered on the lawn to celebrate. Grateful townsfolk eagerly pressed forward, presenting heartfelt gifts of homemade cheese, a custom handcart, and fine sake to express their deep appreciation. Welcoming them with open arms, Farron warmly thanked the crowd and invited everyone to feast, drink, and make merry in honor of their shared triumph. Observing his father generously hosting the very people who came to honor him, Ryu reflected on Farron's genuine kindness, filled with quiet pride to belong to such a family. Calling out to the young hero, the cheerful crowd urged Ryu to join the festivities, praising his pivotal role in the orc extermination and teasing that the food would soon be gone. Reaffirming his absolute devotion to his loved ones, Ryu ran happily toward the gathering, fully resolved to work even harder to protect and support his family from that day